All right, we got chapter 6, part 2 of Holes Anatomy Physiology, still in my pajamas. All right, regulation of body temperature. We've talked about this or touched on it before, where the body will adjust. If it gets hot, it will adjust its blood flow. We've talked about vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Dilation means expanding your blood vessels. Constriction means squeezing them down the diameter. So that'll reappear. That's largely discussed here. The hypothalamus helps to regulate that. There's an ideal set point, and this whole system, the most important thing you understand is this whole system works through negative feedback. Now, problems can happen, of course. You can have hyperthermia, which is abnormally high body temperature. This includes a fever, for example. And hypothermia, abnormally low body temperature, such as when you are in a frozen lake or something like that, you fell in. You could get hypothermia, or being in too cold of water for too long, and so on. So the dermis actually helps us to control our body temperature. And like I said, the dermis, the blood vessels, when it's very cold outside, to conserve heat so a lot doesn't get out, the blood vessels will narrow or constrict, and on hot days they will widen or enlarge to allow the heat to escape from the blood. You also have goosebumps, potentially when you get cold, and that's so that the hairs rise, and they help to trap more warm air underneath the goosebumps, thus minimizing how much of the cold air out here is touching your skin. Helps to keep you warmer. That's the purpose of goosebumps. Although there is also, some people get goosebumps through fear and so on. Skin color. Why is your color the color it is? Why do you look the way you do? So there's varying amounts of melanin in every person. Everybody has the same number of melanocytes. These are the cells that produce melanin that we'll talk about. But everybody produces different amounts of melanin. Melanin is the actual pigment. Someone who's albino doesn't have melanin. What can affect melanin production? Well, sunlight, whether it's from the real sun or from fake sun, X-rays, and then all these things help to darken melanin. The more melanin, its purpose in the body is to absorb the UV rays from the sun and to minimize their effect on your skin cells. And this is why, for example, when you go in the sun over summertime, you might get more freckles. Well, freckles are tiny pockets of increased melanin production, trying to absorb the UV rays from the sun. So the longer you're in the sun, the more melanin you produce. Has nothing to do with being tan. Melanin is not the color you turn when you get tan. That's entirely different, okay? You can also change your color based on how much blood flow goes to the surface of your skin. You might look whiter or more red depending on if it's cold or warm out. Constriction of dermal blood vessels, same thing with dilation. Accumulation of carotene. If you eat a lot of carrots, you might turn orange. I know they say that, it sounds weird, but you can get a little bit orange. And then jaundice is a yellowish type coloration that's fairly common with babies when they're born, and then goes away slightly as they get older. Although I know that I'm still slightly jaundiced. You can look at my palms and they're a little bit yellow. Jaundice is tied to liver function. When your liver is not functioning optimally, you might be a little bit jaundiced, leaving behind some of the yellowish pigmentation. So here we have melanocytes producing the melanin, which is the dark brown pigment. Everybody has the same number of melanocytes. It's just how much melanin is produced. And this is affected by your heredity, genetically, how much these cells are turned on, and also how much you're exposed to UV radiation, of course. We already talked about melanin being important for a number of reasons, but people with light skin have to be very careful, of course, because the exposure to the sun can cause damage to the DNA of the skin cells, and this damage or mutation to the DNA of the skin cells can lead potentially to cancer. The more time you spend in the sun, the more likely you are potentially to get skin cancer, especially if you're super white and predisposed to skin cancer genetically, or because your skin color is so light. And the more often you burn your skin, burning is essentially too much sun, and that's, you can imagine mutations or changes to your DNA occurring internally, which would be bad. So you don't want to burn, super important. The worst type of skin cancer is called melanoma. You don't want to get melanoma. This is skin cancer of the melanocytes. It's very characteristic. Here we can see a melanocyte producing these legs, these extensions of itself and having the pigmented molecules in there. You can see in the base of the epidermis here. And here you can see, just to give you an idea, here's a melanocyte with these extensions being produced. Actual images, you can see them in both. And these are normal, okay? This is normal. This is not normal. Here we have melanoma, an image of one. So you would go to a dermatologist to have this taken care of. This potentially could go very, very deep under the skin. As you get older, especially if you've had a lot of sun exposure or you're genetically predisposed to skin cancer, someone else in your family had skin cancer or had some moles and things removed, you want to be aware and constantly checking your body for abnormally shaped freckles or moles. Here you see this one is not circular. When they're circular, they're more normal. When they look like this, that is atypical, and you don't want them to look like this. You would go get this checked out right away, of course. Here we see a typical bald man's head, and you can see these brown splotches on the surface of the head. This is called actinic keratosis, and these brown splotches are not good. This person needs to be wearing sunscreen, or did a long time ago, because this can lead to squamous cell carcinoma, a different type of cancer. It's not from the melanocytes. It's now cancer from the actual squamous cells that is his skin here. All right, so skin color is, there's a balance. It's important to be exposed to the sun because it helps you to produce vitamin D, and thus vitamin D helps you to absorb calcium in your gut. This is actually why milk is fortified with vitamin D, because milk has lots of calcium. The vitamin D helps you to absorb the calcium. But then it's bad, of course, because it can cause skin cancer, can cause damage to your DNA, and it also actually destroys folate. So part of the reason why pregnant women take folate or folic acid is because exposure to the sun damages or degrades folate, which is one of the vitamin Bs. And baby, it's super important to have folic acid for the baby, for development. Okay, next topic here is when you get a cut, how does it heal? So here we have a site of injury. Blood gets released into the area if the cut goes down into the dermis. If the cut is just on the surface, on the epidermis, you don't get any bleeding. Nothing happens because there's no blood flow there, right? No blood vessels. But if it goes down into the dermis, you're going to release some blood, and that blood is going to pool up, okay, and then it's going to form a clot. And on the top of the clot, you're going to form a scab. Now, this stuff we talk about at a much later date when we talk about blood, how all this forms. But you get a blood clot and a scab. And then underneath that scab, it's meant to protect the formulation where we have fibroblasts that are going to create connective tissue, scar tissue in this case, to fill the hole, to plug it so that pathogens can't get into your body through that hole. Scar tissue forms really, really fast, much faster than skin cells, and this is why any cut you end up forming a scar instead of skin growing in perfectly, and some people faster than others. Burns, another type of damage to your skin. There's 3 levels: first degree burn, second degree burn, and third degree. Sometimes first degree burn is called superficial partial thickness. A second degree burn is sometimes called a deep partial thickness. And the difference here is it burns some of the dermis, and you'll see this is where your skin gets red, and you get that characteristic I got burned at the beach kind of look where you can see redness versus the normal skin color underneath your shirt, for example. And one thing that happens with second degree burns is you can get blistering because capillaries lose their fluid. Fluid starts to leak out, and the fluid collects between the epidermis and the dermis, and it causes a bubble to rise up in the epidermis, causing that characteristic blistering. Third degree burn, super dangerous, very bad. This is a full thickness burn. Third degree burn is really, really charred skin, dangerous. The person loses sensation and the ability to regulate temperature in those regions. If enough of the body is burned, they lose the ability to regulate temperature altogether, and they can die as a result of that inability. This person will have to then get some type of transplant. They can get an autograft where your own skin is transferred. You might remember they talked about in the tissue engineering, the tissue regeneration video that we showed with the guy who had the stem cell spray gun for burns, where he would take your stem cells and then spray them on your burn. So instead of an autograft, which is really painful and doesn't work all that great, You could use the spray gun instead. That's kind of the newest thing. A homograph would be person to person, someone else donating to you. Now, usually that person's not alive. They're not going to say, here, take a patch of my thigh to put on your thigh, to put on your arm or whatever. Usually this is going to come from a cadaver. And then there's also some skin substitutes, although none of those really work perfectly, but they do exist. So here you have your first degree burn, as I mentioned, that kind of redness. Now, this is no blistering. If this were to blister, then you'll see we have a second degree burn. Now, this is death of just epidermal cells, no dermal cells. So here we see second degree burn. We have some blistering here. You get a lot of leakage from the cells. Now, this is a really bad second degree burn, of course. But here we have blister formation, and it goes into the dermis. Lastly, you have a third degree burn, which you can see the skin is just fully damaged, total loss of receptor function, and it's super painful at first until those receptors, the pain receptors, die in the dermis, and then you basically can't feel anything. Now, one of the things that you'll see from every chapter starting now is something called lifespan changes, but I like to call it, it sucks to get old. What happens when you get old? Your skin becomes scaly and less pliable. You start to get age spots, like you saw that actinic keratosis on the man's head. Your epidermis gets thinner. So one thing that you might have seen in some of your grandparents is the surface of their skin can actually rip or tear back their epidermis. As opposed to getting a cut, it's almost like it peels off because it gets super loose and thin, which can be very damaging and harmful. The dermis can become skinnier, you lose fat, you can get more wrinkling now, of course, as well as sagging, and then the sebaceous glands are going to secrete less and less oil over time. Melanin production slows, so you might start losing hair color. Your hair itself might start to thin as your number of hair follicles decrease. Nail growth slows down and becomes impaired. Your nails might start to look kind of ugly. Some of your parents might have weird, funky-looking nails. It's not their fault. It's because it sucks to get old. And then you have a harder time controlling your body temperature as well. Some possible disease-type things that you could see, not really disease, but things like this, disorders. Acne vulgaris is really common. Sebum clogs the pores. And as a result, bacteria that don't like oxygen, they're anaerobic bacteria, grow underneath the oil, and your immune system starts to attack it and cause a whitehead and blackheads. And then it triggers inflammation. It's also hormonally tied because higher androgens like testosterone and estrogen trigger an increase in oil production, and thus more oil, more sebum means more blockage of your pores and thus more bacteria. Other things could include a blister we already talked about, and calluses, which we talked about. And at that point, we are done. Thank you for watching Chapter 6.